Welcome. I'm Verna, and I've been a master gardener now. I think this is my third year, and I've been gardening since I was 4. I gardened with my father and my mother, and just a few years ago. So I'm glad you all took the time to be with us today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this lovely afternoon. Thank goodness the rain held up. My name is Karen. I am also a master gardener. Verna and I are of the same graduating class as is Debbie. And my background in gardening is relatively limited, but this kind of came out of, today's presentation came out of a combination of my interests being a healthcare provider and a master gardener. And in my own gardening, and I know Verna will speak to that as well, we've run into some issues. So we wanted to pass that experience along with you all. So I'm just going to start the slides, if y'all can just bear with me for just a moment. And, oops, why is this being weird now? Oh, there we go. So gardener beware, avoiding hazards in your garden.
And here are some of the topics that we will be discussing today. We were going to be talking about garden safety tips for both yourself and for your children who are involved in gardening with you, and for your pets, some preventative strategies to make your gardening experience more safe and healthy, and some potential hazards that you possibly could come against and how to prevent them from occurring. We're going to be talking about lawn equipment, including lawnmowers and gardening equipments, chemicals, and what the risks are and how you can prevent them. And then tips for planning a safe garden that's kind of freer from hazards. Okay, take it away, Karen.
So just to give you a brief overview when we talk about the risks versus the benefits of gardening, I mean, we all know that gardening is an activity that can be enjoyed at any age, and it can be enjoyed for a lifetime. What we're hoping to portray today is the ability to minimize any risks to enhance your gardening experience. And we just wanted to give you a little background as to the benefits of gardening. I would take it that since you're all probably avid gardeners, you know that it's good for you. You know you feel better. You know you enjoy getting out in the fresh air and getting your hands dirty. And there really is evidence-based literature surrounding as such. There have been studies, Porter in 2018 found that there were positive health as well as wellness impacts for gardeners, and it improved things like not only emotional health, it also had to do with reducing the use of chronic medications and issues that need chronic treatment. Also, there's obviously, especially this time of the year as our harvests in our vegetable gardens are coming to yield, increased consumption of nutritionally rich food and everything that comes along with that. It also has been most recently studied relative to a sedentary lifestyle, and no shock to probably anybody here, gardening does in fact enhance mental well-being, gets you out there, stops that feeling of being isolated, and also aids with decreasing your body metabolic index, your BMI, weight relative to height. But nonetheless, as Verna has alluded to, we need to be mindful of risks, not only to ourselves, potentially to our pets, to our children. And that brings us to this crazy image, which was just a cartoon that really resonated with me. And I ask you all to take a look really quickly. What kind of dangers are you seeing here? And if you'd like to answer on the chat, or if you'd like to speak out, be my guest. And of course, this is an extreme, but it's a little graphic that really shows a lot of bad things, some of which I've done, quite honestly. Not the least of which is this gentleman appears to be outside in the rain. I'm thinking it's an electric mower. So he's out in the rain with an electric device, no more than the electric radio. On the grass, he's got his shears as well as some tin cans that are open. So there, we all know there's some potential there for some injuries, as well as a rake that he can step on and biff himself in the head, which I have done, actually. So we hope that you all don't end up like this gentleman. But Verna is going to speak to some personal risks, starting with risks to us.
Right. And, you know, before you even go out into the garden, make sure you dress properly. It's really important that, if possible, wear those long sleeves, long pants, a wide brimmed hat to protect you from the sun, closed toe shoes, and make sure 20 minutes before you go out, you are applying broad spectrum sunscreen, SPF 30 or greater. And then you make sure you have that insect repellent, especially this year. I don't know about anybody else, but I have really been encountering a lot of mosquitoes and ticks this year. So it's really important that we think about this. And wearing sunglasses is so important. That ultraviolet, you have an increased risk for cataracts in the eyes. And before you go inside, make sure you check for those ticks. And just get them off before you even go inside. Make sure you garden at a time when there's shade or less risk of heat, which is between 10 and 2, or 10 and 2 in the morning, 10 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon are when the sun is strongest, or with daylight saving, it would be 11 to 3. So try to avoid those hours, and make sure you have water with you, drinking water, so that you can drink and stay hydrated as you're outside.
Exactly. And we also want to look at not only protection, but the risk for injuries. I don't know about you, but I could very much empathize with this gentleman here with his lower back pain. In addition to limiting garden sessions to a shorter period of time, it's not a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a, what is it? I say it always backwards, Verna. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You can tell I'm not a runner. But anyway, the point of the story is put someplace to sit where you're gardening. Do it in short spurts. It doesn't have to be all done in a day. Believe me, it's going to wait for you. It's going to be there when you come back. It's also recommended that you do some warm-up exercises or stretching exercises before you start to garden. That may very well be why this gentleman is having such back pain, just stretching out a little. You also want to rotate the tasks you're doing so that you don't have repetitive movements over and over again. The perfect example is when I went on this deadheading crusade throughout my garden. And by the end of the time I was doing that, my wrist was sore because, again, I wasn't listening to my own advice and I was just doing the same thing over and over again. So by rotating your tasks, the hope is that you'll decrease the potential for injuries. As I say, relax, even if it's a folding chair, a bench, even if you bring a towel out with you and sit in the shade for a little while, by all means, remember to take breaks and avoid uncomfortable positions. I like to say that if your body is speaking to you, as is the case with this graphic, that's a clue. Your body's trying to tell you, okay, it's time for a timeout. We need to take a break for a little while. So be mindful and listen to those messages. And as is often recommended relative to body mechanics, bend at the knees, not at the waist, and also don't strain lifting heavy objects. If you're not able to get help moving heavy objects, then by all means, there are ways to move things that are mechanically safer. Whether it's, putting leaves on a old, I've done this, put leaves on an old plastic tablecloth I had from eating outside. That wasn't really nice enough to be used anymore. It had gotten a little bit ratty. But guess what? it slides really easy across the grass when I'm removing leaves. So you just want to be mindful, and simple adaptations can really make it a lot more pleasurable and a lot less potentially painful. Of course, we always recommend speaking to your healthcare provider prior to taking on any physical activity because everybody is unique.
There's also a lot more equipment out there and tools. Like I hate weeding. Oh my goodness, do I hate weeding. And this year, again, it's like the mosquitoes. I mean, they're everywhere this year. And there's like long handled weeders that really have helped me a lot. I've been having some terrible back pain, and that has really helped me because I don't have to bend down. I just use this weeder. And I garden for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I take a little walk around where I just stretch because I really can't do more than 15 minutes at a time, and then I go back to it.
That's good advice, Verna. That being said, it's also recommended that you wear gardening gloves, not only to protect your hand from the soil, but also from potential pathogens in the soil, potential insect bites, or other skin irritants. I have that nice Irish pale skin. So I'll touch something and all of a sudden I'm itchy. So I'm a big aficionado of gloves. And it doesn't matter, there's no right or wrong. You don't have to spend a boatload of money to buy special gloves. I've seen people garden with, with work gloves, with dishwashing gloves, whatever you can find. It is said that leather provides a greater protection against puncture injuries. So if you're working with something that has a thorn, again, that leather will provide a little bit more help, and it's a little bit more protection against bites as well. But going back to what Verna said as well, you want to be mindful of your tools. You want to use the appropriate tools for what you're doing. For example, a tall shovel relative to a hand shovel. Be mindful of buried objects when you're digging, whether it's a root from a nearby tree or a foundation from a previous structure. Things like glass I have found in the soil, metal I have found in the soil. So again, you want to have all your wits about you and be paying attention to what you're doing, because you never know what you're going to find, that's for sure. Speaking of potential cuts and injuries along those lines, it's also important to keep in mind that your tetanus shot should be up to date. So another great reason to speak to your healthcare provider and find out when that was last done. Better to be preventative and get it done ahead of time than have to need it after the fact. You also want to see if you can find hand tools that are ergonomically designed. The reason being that they also provide less strain on the wrist and elbow. And they're becoming far more common. Of course, you can find them online. Occasionally, I will see them in the big box stores locally, but they definitely are out there for sure. Keep in mind that you also want to keep your hand and wrist in a straight line as best you can when using hand tools. I have seen adaptive tools sold for individuals with arthritis that actually have a bar that will go up the forearm. Again, when you have arthritic joints, sometimes it's a little bit easier to use the strength of your whole arm, or at least the lower portion of your arm, instead of just your wrist, is the thought process behind that. Also keep in mind, we spoke of leather gloves earlier. Rubber gloves are actually recommended if you would be using any garden chemicals. Of course, you also want to be mindful of those gloves not having any tears or holes in them that might have some exposure risk for you.
So some more safety tips and to avoid risks. Make sure you read the labels and the instructions on all equipment before you begin using it. Make sure you're using the equipment in the way that it was intended. I have family members who are always trying to use something for what it was not intended, and sometimes with very dire consequences. So, and also when you're using chemicals, make sure you are using the proper dosage, a proper amount, and that you're using it in the intended way and you're using it safely. Make sure you store all of your equipment safely also. And we'll be talking later on about children, but just make sure you have it in a place where you can easily access it and get it out, but it's also out of the way of children. It's in a locked shed or garage. As I get older, I have harder time getting to my equipment, and so I ended up this year investing in a shed near my garden, so that way I have easy access to it. And it does have a lock on it, which makes it easier for me. Just because I'm trying to prevent problems with getting things and having access to it. When you're using machinery, make sure you use ear protection and eye protection, maybe goggles. And make sure that when you're using equipment, you don't leave it unattended while, after you're working with it. I know I get so easily distracted now. And so I always have to think, if there's someone else around, it doesn't have to be a child, it could be an adult, want to make sure that they are not going to trip over it or knock it over or, get hurt with anything that is sharp. So just make sure you're limiting your distractions when you're using equipment. Wear gloves, just like Karen was saying, to minimize the risk of cuts and exposure to skin irritants. And make sure that you clean your equipment when you are finished with it. So that way it'll be clean for the next use. And make sure, again, you're wearing long sleeves, long pants, so that you are using equipment and have less chance of getting hurt. And okay, that's your turn.
That's okay. You're on a roll. It all is, it really is all one big thing. If you're using gardening equipment or landscaping equipment that has a safety device, it's important to use those safety guards. And again, as Verna had said, complying with the manufacturer's instructions as to the proper use of that equipment. You don't want to tamper with any of the safety guards that are on the equipment. It's there for a reason. Legitimately, it's really very, very important. It's also very important to make sure your equipment is in good working order. Verna addressed this earlier. You want to make sure that your equipment is also cleaned regularly, partially because those blades or what have you, those tools, as they age or as they become more dirty or rusty or what have you, they might become less effective. They might be putting more wear and tear on you as the individual, and they also might become safety risks. They might not be cutting as sharply, what have you. So be mindful of that. Wear safety goggles if you are using a line trimmer. They are a really common cause of eye injuries for people using them. Also be mindful of electrical wires. I spoke to some grass and metal being buried. You might be coming across electrical wires somewhere on your property or where you're doing your work. And clearly, it said, doesn't necessarily need to be said, but you shouldn't be cutting through those. So it's something to be mindful of. And sometimes we don't think about it all that much. Relative to this cartoon here, it is recommended that you do not stand on the highest rung of a ladder, nor do you have someone leaning out a window and holding on to the ladder while you try and pick your pears. Obviously, there's an increased risk of tipping, and falling from a ladder is a very serious issue that can cause fractures, dislocations, even soft tissue injuries, bumps and bruises. Earplugs for noisy equipment, again, exposure to very loud noises can affect an individual's hearing. So lawnmowers, lawn trimmers, chainsaws, things along that line. And also make sure that the tools are the right size for you. I have over the years, as Verna has said, made some adaptations myself. As opposed to using a traditional spade, I actually use a Queen Anne's shovel now. It's smaller and it might take me a little bit longer to get through the work, but it's far easier for me because it's a smaller head and I'm lifting far less than I would with a traditional shovel. So just some ideas.
Um, There are so many benefits for involving children in gardening. I'm a former early childhood teacher, and children learn about math, about literacy. They learn about science, and it's just such a valuable experience. And just working together on a project is so important. But there are also many gardening risks, so we have to be very, very careful. I worked with the most wonderful teacher, and what she always did before she started anything new, she would sit her children down and she would talk to them about, the opportunities for learning, but also some potential risks, just to make sure that they understood, the things that could go, that they had to avoid, and the ways to be safe. I once saw her going into a grocery store, and she sat the kids on the little radiator going into the grocery store, and she said to them, "We're going to be going to the grocery store today, and we're going to be there for 15 minutes, and this is what I expect from you, and I want us to have fun, and here's what we're going to do." So I think that's a really good idea, before you even take the kids out into the garden, if you're going to start gardening with them, so that you can really talk to them about this and the equipment you're going to be using and how they have to be safe around this equipment. So, make sure that if you are occupied with a lawnmower or gardening equipment, make sure children are in another area, if possible. I mean, if it's something that is like a lawnmower, you just don't want to have them nearby, and preferably they would be monitored by another adult. And make sure children do not touch a lawnmower, especially after you've used it, because it is very hot. And what really drives me crazy, I get so worried, is when I see people ride on lawnmowers and they have their children on the back or on the front. Oh my goodness, I mean, there's so much potential for your children getting hurt. So please be careful. And do not leave power tools plugged in and unattended around children. Chemicals, I mean, make sure they're not on the ground and you all of a sudden are in another part. It only takes 1 minute. Children are so fast. So make sure you always know where everything is and where your children are. And make sure you're always storing the gardening tools and equipment safely and securely at all times. Before you go outside, just like you dress yourself to prevent sunburn or insects, make sure you do the same thing with your children. They have long sleeves, long pants, a wide brim hat, sunglasses, and insecticide so that they are all set. Do not leave buckets of water around. I mean, the potential for either them drinking water that isn't safe or falling in. And also make sure you have a soil test on your garden just to make sure that there isn't lead in the soil that could prevent another hazard. If you're going to be harvesting vegetables, make sure you set up a washing station so everybody can wash their hands before they pick the vegetables, and then wash the produce under running tap water before you actually eating it also. Anybody else have any other tips for either gardening with children or any other thing that we have talked about so far? Just raise your hand if you have something or questions. Okay. Well,
very good. All great tips, Verna. As pet lovers, we also wanted to speak to risks for pets. You need to choose plants very wisely because there are some plants that are toxic to pets. Um, Obviously, always consult your veterinary specialist relative to this because, again, we speak in broad categories here. But the ASPCA does have a toxic plant website that I believe is in your references that you might find useful. Things like tulips, daffodils, azaleas, rhododendrons, castor beans, autumn crocuses, chrysanthemums, English ivy, oleander, um, morning glories, even lilies can be toxic to canines or felines. Um, and again, we're speaking in broad categories here. That being said, also keep in mind that things like cocoa mulch shells can also cause a harmful reaction to pets. Some hardwood mulches often will contain colored dyes and can cause sensitivities to animals. I have an English bulldog who just loves laying in the mulch. And the mulch is now gone because that is exactly what has happened to him. That being said, also give thought to fertilizer. Absorption of fertilizer chemicals in the groundstuffs, again, can be dangerous to pets. So you want to know what you're using on your landscaping, whether it's your vegetable garden, because my dog's in there too, or your grass or your flowers or your shrubs. Know what you're using, know what the recommendations are, follow the labels that are on those products, and be aware of the safety practices surrounding those. You see here as well, secure your compost bins. That's a nice, smelly, tasty place that some pets like to explore. And obviously, if you're taking your animal out with you to do any yard work, make sure you have some water there and that they remain hydrated. It doesn't take long. Their body temperature traditionally is far higher than ours as well. Which brings us, Verna, to lawnmower safety. Verna's our lawnmower lady.
Oh, yeah. And for not the right reasons, unfortunately. Yes, lawnmowers are one of the most dangerous, both the push mowers and the riding lawnmowers. So you just, again, you have to dress appropriately. Make sure you can't wear sandals when you are mowing the lawn. So you make sure you have closed toe shoes, preferably safety boots with steel toe caps. Make sure you have eye protection because, oh, those sticks and stones, you don't see them coming and they can just really dart out at you. So safety goggles are a great thing to have. Also ear protection. Lawnmowers are really noisy and there are so many people who have, hearing problems now because of all the loud noise from a lot of this equipment. And ride-on mowers are really dangerous, but even the push mowers, I see people trying to get something that is stuck on the bottom of their lawnmower, maybe grass or something, but they don't turn the lawnmower off. Make sure you turn it off, you cool it, and then you find out what's under the lawnmower that is causing the problems. You really have to think through and really plan ahead. And lawnmowers can tip, so be careful especially when you're riding on a hill or an unstable area, and drive at low speeds, especially when you are turning. And look out for low limbs on trees. I had an experience last year when I was just having a great time on this riding lawnmower. I just thought I was the lawnmower queen and just riding around. And what happened was there was a low hanging branch and it didn't look really low to me, but I had one of those little back bars on the back of my lawnmower. And I of course, couldn't see the back. So all of a sudden, boom. And thank goodness I was going slow because I ended up in the tree. And thank goodness. And so another tip is make sure you always have your cell phone with you, because I had to call my poor husband and say, can you come out and back here? Because I am now stuck in the tree. So I never would have thought of that. I mean, that limb did not look that low. So please be careful.
And it just speaks to, just because we have a little bit more experience or knowledge with master gardeners, we do this all the time. We make mistakes.
Yes.
Everybody does.
Yep, this is after I was a master gardener, I hate to say. But anyway, so be very careful. And we did take the back bar off because I thought this is not helping my lawn mowing experience here. Lawn mowers can, can cause burns. So be careful not to touch the equipment parts. Turn it off, let it cool, and then figure it out. And before you even start mowing, make sure you go around your yard, you pick up all the sticks and stones and everything else so that you don't mow over them and have them become a projectile. Make sure there's nobody around you when you're mowing too, because if it doesn't hit you, it might hit someone else. And again, do not reach under the mower while it's turned on. Wait for it to cool before you pull around. Okay. And then next slide.
There we go. Safe
Okay.
garden practices. Go right ahead, Verna. Fire away.
Okay. So before you even plan your garden location, make sure you plan it safely. Make sure you plan your garden so that it is not near garbage cans, your well with a well cap, the septic system. Make sure it's not near piles of manure, and make sure you that you use safe water to water, especially edible gardens, gardens with edible plants. I live right near a lake, but I don't know the water quality of my lake. There are houses right on the lake. So you have to make sure, because people have septic systems who live on this lake. I don't know if it's, safe, whether the septic system is oozing into the lake. There are fish, there's animals that are swimming in the lake. So I just don't know exactly the safety. So I will not use my lake water, river, or stream water to use as something to water my garden. It's really, we have to also check and make sure if you're using well water that your well, we have a well right near our garden because the garden is not near the house. So we had to check the water quality of the well just to make sure that it's safe to use on vegetables. Do not feed wild animals or birds near your garden. That's not supposed to be safe. Fences will keep out the animals from the garden. And store your vegetable produce safely. If you choose to wash your produce before you use it, make sure you dry it thoroughly. It says not to wash berries before you're going to eat them because the quality won't be as well. And if you choose to store your vegetables without washing right away, make sure you brush off any garden dirt with paper towels or a soft brush while you're still outside. Potatoes, tomatoes, onions should not be put in the refrigerator, but they should be stored in a cool, pest-free location instead.
Correct. Right, you are, Verna. I know somebody had posted a question on the chat box, which our coordinator Megan had answered, but we wanted to open up the floor to ask if you all had any questions. And we also wanted to make you all aware of our helpline number. Because of the current pandemic, we ask that if you call this number with a gardening or landscaping question, you leave a message and we will get back to you in a very timely fashion. Or you have the option of sending the Kent County Master Gardeners here in Delaware an email or a photo surrounding an issue that is concerned to you to our Gmail address, which you also see listed here. So please take note of those, and they're obviously available all the time. And you also have in your slides some of the sites where we did get our information. So if you're interested in those, you can follow up yourself And of course, we don't recommend any specific brands relative to tools or anything you might be using in your garden. We just speak in broad strokes for recommendations, again, based upon our experience. But that being said, please, let's open the floor for some questions.
Okay, I do have a question here, and it says, I've recently moved out of state. Where could I find information in other counties? Is there a list of plants that are safe and unsafe for dogs and cats? I don't know if you have that in your resources or.
I don't think we do have it in our resources. I thought we did, but we don't. But the ASPCA, if you look at their website, they do have some information surrounding plants that are toxic to certain animals. I would also recommend calling your local veterinarian and seeing if they have any information relative to that and your new area. You can also try reaching out to your local county master gardeners. Would be another recommendation, or perhaps the local agricultural department to see if they might potentially have some information as well. Did
There
you
is
have anything?
there is a pet-friendly gardening website that was given here, which is, I think, Pennsylvania State University. And I think that has some of the plants that are, that top one there. I think that has some plants that are toxic to animals.
Oh, sure enough, this last one here on this slide, the Pamela T. Hubbard, PSU Pet Friendly Gardens. There
And
you
which
go.
also brings us, the resources that we've used here are all research-based. It isn't just, Pinterest or something like that. I mean, we try to use the cooperative extension information, which is all based on research. So that we would be giving you the best advice.
And I also
Correct.
know that every, we're opening up our online workshops to everyone in the world. I mean, we've had people register from Australia and we even had someone register from Africa. So with it being all over the world, I just want to let you know that in the United States, every one of the 50 states has a Master Gardener program. So check with the cooperative extension at a university or just look up Master Gardeners and then put your state in there if you Google it. And you should be able to get information that's particular to your area. So we have another question. Someone asked if they're wondering how they can keep their tools from getting rust. They keep them in a gardening storage out of the weather, but they still get rust.
Sure, sure. So the actually, ironically, I had just looked this up for somebody else today, and the Colorado State University Master Gardeners have a wonderful website surrounding cleaning your tools. They recommend that you wash the tools with a garden hose, scrub it with a wire or stiff bristled brush to get any additional debris off once you have finished using it. They suggested that you dip the tools into a very diluted solution of household bleach, 10 parts water to 1 part bleach, to disinfect any pruning tools. That is hopefully going to prevent you carrying any potential pathogens from one plant or shrub or what have you to another when you're working. That being said, I have also read over the winter season to actually, what I do is I put my tools in a 5-gallon plastic container filled with play sand that has oil in it. Just enough oil to kind of moisten the sand. It helps with the rust and it helps keep them sharp. But that's what I would recommend. I don't know about you, Verna.
Yeah, and also make sure that your tools are dried after you wash them. Use a towel, just an old towel to make sure every working part is, and maybe oil too, you know, after that. And I also recommend, I found out the hard way, not only should your tools be sterilized, but I also have tomato steaks that I use. And I also have to sterilize. It's a pain, but you get that 1 to 10 solution. And I make sure that at the end of the season, I sterilize all my steaks or any kind of trellis systems or anything like that, and then thoroughly dry them and then
Yeah.
store them in a dry location.
Yeah.
Because again, you know, I had terrible fungus one year because of the moisture and everything else. And I certainly didn't want that back again the next year. So make sure you also take care of any other gardening, you know, a paraphernalia that you have. Make sure it's all sterilized.
Yeah, that's a very good point. For my tomato steaks, and I have eggplant steaks as well, I bought one of those like El Cheapo spritzer bottles that you can get in a lot of the larger box stores, and put that solution in there and sprayed everything. I found it a little bit easier than going over it with like a sponge or something, kind of gotten all the little nooks and crannies. But that's a good point. Also keep in mind, don't forget, anytime that you are gardening, when you come back in, wash your hands. There's a lot going on out there. And again, as a healthcare provider, you would be amazed. You would be amazed. I have seen people who were out, didn't realize they got exposed to poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac. And because they did not either remove the clothes they were gardening in or did not wash their hands, they actually were spreading it to other areas. So it seems like something simple and obvious, but it really is important. No more than I have friends who will wash the paws of their pets that have been out with them as well, to help limit any exposure that they might have had out in the yard as well.
And I use cloth pieces of to tie around my tomato plants. And at the end of the season, I also wash that in the washing machine too. So just to make sure that you never know when there's a disease in your plant, or, you know, you just don't want to have the same problem the next year. So everything, I start out fresh every gardening season.
Yes, yeah, good point. Very good point.
But it is important to wash those clothes, because you just don't know. I know with poison ivy with me, it doesn't appear until 2 days later. So whenever I've been out, you know, outside trimming or anything, I'm always taking, you know, the clothes and washing them thoroughly.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and with poison ivy, it's really those essential, it's the oils that can spread. So if you have it on something you're wearing, and you could potentially expose it to somebody else in your home, you know, so yeah, it's definitely a wise thing to do. And I'm not a big fan of doing laundry, but it's smart.
Are there any more questions out there?
Or comments or things that you'd like to share? Any gardening hazards that we haven't mentioned that you would like to mention?
Yeah, I have my hand up, but
Go ahead.
I keep putting that little hand up.
Oh, there you are.
Sorry, we didn't see you. Go ahead.
Some of the master gardeners have recently introduced me to neem oil, which I had never used before. And I was able to get it online through Home Depot, and I picked it up yesterday and studiously followed the directions and mixed it up in my gallon container and got it all over my kale last night and all over my roses. And I have about half a container of the gallon left from last night. And I'm wondering, can I continue to store it in there? And I know it says something about cleaning the sprayer thoroughly. Can I leave that for a few days, or will the sprayer get all clogged up if I do that? Does it really need to be cleaned right away, or does the neem oil go bad if you leave it for a few days to reuse it after a storm? Does anyone have an answer on that?
I can tell you that I mix it up in a 2-gallon sprayer. And I do save it if I don't use it all. At the end of the season, I definitely will clean it out, but I use a lot of it, so I go through it pretty quickly, so it's never very old in there, but it should definitely keep for a few days. And you have to remember that neem oil washes off really easily, so after a rain or storm, you have to repeat because it'll be washed away. It sticks a little bit better if you mix a little bit of like soap, like
Yes,
we were talking about either Murphy's oil soap, or I use very mild plant-based dishwashing liquid and put
that's
just
what I did. I
Right.
put dishwashing liquid in with it.
But neem oil is like my favorite way to stop the bugs that are eating my plants, because if you use it properly, it will kill the bugs that are eating the plants, but not hurt the good bugs that don't eat plants. So that's why that's my favorite
Right.
insecticide that I would use if I absolutely have to use
I've
it.
recently been to 2 different Master Gardener clinics that both recommended neem oil. Neem oil is all they were talking about as a
Sure.
pesticide, as a fungicide, as all
Right.
kinds of, for all kinds of wonderful
Usually
uses.
I get those little black spots too. I spray it on that as a fungicide. But you just have to keep doing it over and over and over again. And
Well, the directions say you can brush your teeth with it and shampoo your hair with it and all kinds of things.
I know they do include it in some personal care products, but I wouldn't really recommend
Yeah.
brushing.
No, no.
It does come from a tree, so it's natural. It's a natural plant-based product.
But in terms of what we're talking about, do I need to clean the sprayer after every use? Do I need to take that sprayer off and
I don't
clean it?
I don't clean mine. I clean mine when I'm done using that container, but as I refill it, I don't, unless it was to get clogged up, I don't clean it. I mean, it's just got neem oil in it. It's not had any other chemicals. The container I use is only for neem oil. It's not used for any other chemicals. So I just, I don't have to like worry about cleaning out a different kind of chemical or anything like that and using it again. But I'm not sure what your directions say. I don't clean mine unless it has a problem, unless it were to get clogged up.
Sure, sure. So for those of you who aren't familiar with neem oil, two things before we move on to the next question, just to bring to your attention. There is a National Pesticide Information Center. All you have to do is type into an internet search engine, the National Pesticide Information Center, and there you can find safety information surrounding any product, neem oil or otherwise, that you might be using at your home, garden, landscaping, yard, what have you. And neem oil, even though it is a naturally occurring substance, is considered a pesticide. It is found in the seeds of the neem tree. And it's yellow, it's kind of bitter. Some people describe it as smelling or tasting like garlic or sulfur. And it's been used for hundreds of years. People do have great success with it. There are some products out there that are neem oil mixed with other things. So that's why it's very important to know exactly what you have and read the label very well and be aware of whatever you need to do to be safe when you're using it. I think oftentimes, and again, this is just anecdotal based on my experience, I think oftentimes people think that just because something is naturally occurring, that it is not without risk. But it is. It does carry some risk. On the National Pesticide website, it says that eating, breathing, or even skin or eye contact to something like neem can cause irritation. So you do want to keep your exposures low. And again, it all is also a matter of what might be added to that. There's different products out there. And obviously we can't speak to all of them. And children, it says as well, would be specifically very sensitive potentially to the components. not toxic to birds, mammals, bees, or plants. And that's part of the reason why we as Master Gardeners do advocate for it, because it still allows those native bees to thrive. But it would be toxic to fish or other water dwelling species. So a great question, Claire. Thank you so much for bringing it to the conversation. Yeah, very, very good question.
You told me it was important to use 100% cold pressed neem oil and not, I went to a garden center that had the 70% with hydroponic something another in it, and they said, don't get that.
See? There you go. Exactly. You're a good student. You very good.
Here's your research.
It's the organic, cold pressed, pure stuff. Yeah. And as far as bee toxicity, actually, it can be toxic to bees if you spray it right on them. So you don't want to be spraying while bees are out there buzzing around. But it really is designed to be to kill the bugs that ingest it. So since bees would never ingest it, if you spray it on the flower when the bees aren't around or the plants, it's not going to hurt the bees as long as it dies before the bees are present.
That's a good point, Debbie. And yet again, because we advocate for research-based information, Oregon State University, their cooperative extension has a lot of information online for those who might be interested.
And just clarification on vegetables, you said that should not be refrigerated. Tomatoes and potatoes I knew about, but did you say onions as well?
Onions, yes. And
Okay.
that was, you know, the source that I saw. Yeah. They said to put them in a cool spot, but not in the refrigerator. That's just one place that I looked, you know, was one of the university. I think it was University of Maine, but, you know, that was a recommendation.
I better go take mine out of the refrigerator.
There you go. Yeah. Eggplant as well. Don't refrigerate eggplant. They will be sad eggplants.
Verna, thank you. You guys did a great job. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you all for coming.
joining us and spending an hour of your day with us. Thank you so much.